Hi guys, Charisma here. In case you haven't ever been to my channel, I love to travel and talk about my experiences, and I thought it was a great idea to talk about this very personal experience I had. This doesn't involve international travel like a lot of other my other videos have discussed. This actually involves travel right within the state that I live in currently. So I've lived in multiple places in the US, but home is in Louisiana. And I decided, as part of this journey that I've been on, my spiritual journey, as well as my interest in my own culture, meaning my African heritage, because I know somewhere down the line I had my ancestors that were from Africa, right? So I've been wanting to honor them in a really special way, and I wanted to learn from my past. And so I thought, what is a way that I can do this that resonates really well with me? So if I talk about plantations, right, which I could go on a whole spiel about this. If I talk about plantations, normally I get like tense physically, I get sad, I get mad. You know, there's a lot of varying emotions that happen when I'm thinking about plantations and the conditions of the plantations. But there's one particular one that I started researching. I honestly don't even remember how I came across it, but I was like, okay, this feels different. Just from the website alone, it felt like it was going to be different for me. So I convinced my best friend to go with me to visit the Whitney Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana. It's about, I think, 48 minutes from Baton Rouge, 48 to 50 minutes from New Orleans. So not necessarily in the heart of either of those places, but right in between the two, which perfectly fits with the way that the German slave coast and the sugarcane coast actually came about. So I actually have done several TikToks on this. One was with the West Baton Rouge Museum, I believe. And it talked about the sugarcane plantations. And so Whitney Plantation actually was a sugarcane plantation. They also did indigo there before they did sugarcane, and then at one point I believe it was actually rice as well. So I decided I wanted to visit this plantation. I wanted to honor my ancestors in a way that was fitting for me, because often I have visited plantations, and they just didn't feel very inviting. I felt heavy when I left. Again, I felt angry. Like Natchez, Mississippi, I visited one. I can't even remember the name of it, honestly. And it was just not a great experience. I mean, it was there. I learned some things, but it wasn't the same as Whitney. So Whitney focuses on the enslaved history rather than the actual overall history of like the owners of the plantation, like many of them do. They focused and honored those people who cultivated the lands, who died on the lands. Of course, it is a dark history, but it just felt different, y'all. So if you ever get a chance, I would encourage you to go visit Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. We actually met several people, including a family from British Canada, British Vancouver, I think, Canada. And I thought it was really cool. Like and then when we were getting ready to leave out of the museum, it sounded like there were some people, they actually had very strong German accents. So I believe they're from Germany. I'm not sure because we didn't talk to that group, but we did talk to the others. And when I say I mean me and my best friend. And so we did this tour. It is $25 a person. If you're in the parish, which is St. John, or I believe it could be if you're French Saint-Jean, then it's only like 13, 14 bucks. So it's a little bit less than a person who's not from there. Either way though, $25 is not a ton. So when you first get there, I felt a whole different like vibe shift. It just felt, I'm not gonna say it felt heavy, but it almost felt, for me as a Black woman, like there was a immediate chill or like a quiet solitude in the air. But I also knew exactly what I was going for and what I wanted to get, or what I hoped to get out of the experience. So for me, what I was kind of thinking was like, I really want to go. I want to honor my ancestors. And I did. I think I honestly got to do that. But I had this intentionally planned out. So the first thing I did was I planned to do a prayer, and I got my prayer, the particular one that resonated with me, from Speaking with Spirit, which is by the Ray Seiki Art Temple. It's a book that has multiple different prayers in it, and because I practice a Kemetic, or I try to practice a Kemetic lifestyle, I thought that fit best. It honored my ancestors. It gave them praises. It talked about how we wouldn't forget them, which I think is the whole purpose when I plan to visit these plantations. I want them to know, like, I am here. I am listening. My ears are opening. I want to honor them. I want to give back. I don't want people to forget their history, because if we forget history, we're bound to redo it, right? And so we started off at the front door. We met those people. When you first go in, there's a gift shop, but there's also the museum portion, which I'm going to make sure I add throughout this video some different photos, but I also have a TikTok video of it too. I have multiple images that I think are really important to talk about, and I want to make sure I have time to do so. But I just want to tell you about the overall experience. So the first thing we did was we took our time, probably about an hour or so, in the museum portion, which is big. It's not as big as something like, say, the Smithsonian, right? It's nowhere near that size, but there's so much information that you're just like bombarded with. And it starts from the transatlantic slave trade to the enslaved that are in Louisiana, or that were in Louisiana, to the sugarcane, to prisons, which, if anyone knows Louisiana history, Angola prison was actually a plantation that I believe was either donated or sold to the state, and it is now a prison. 13th Amendment, right? It's crazy. And there's actually documentaries on it, which I'll plug, I'm sure, somewhere in the comment section or in the information part of this video about the documentary 13. But there's so much to take in. And then there's these really amazing statues of the enslaved. I want to say the one statue that's inside the museum is the same little girl, I believe, now I could be wrong, but Hannah Kelly. And it talks about her on the back of my little card, which I'll tell you more about this. However, though, I believe, you go through that, you get to see these different things. You learn a lot in the first little portion, the first hour, and it's all self-guided. So there are people, not necessarily tour guides, but there are people who know the history of this plantation, who maybe have had family, and they can answer questions along the way, but they're not guiding you through the tour. And so you start off in the museum portion, and then you can go and you get your headphones, because it's a self-guided audio tour. It's 14 different locations on the site, and you can, if you want to use their headphones and their audio, you have to give an ID or a license or something like that. And then once everyone returns their items, you get your license back. But I prefer that over the other option, which you could do too, is you could download the Whitney Plantation app on your phone and put your headphones in and listen that way, which works too, but it didn't feel quite as connected as using the audio headset, just because there were particular things that you had to like play and pause and stuff, whereas you couldn't necessarily do that on your own app. You could do it, but it didn't feel as smooth of a transition. And so you started there, and then once you walked out the doors, you get your equipment, you walk out the doors, you go through 14 different portions of this plantation, which ran until 1975, by the way. So obviously, I'm assuming they were paying people by 1975, but they did have various things on there, like the store, which was creating credit for people, which means they couldn't even afford to get off of the plantation, because they always had credit that would come out of their paycheck. So they were never able to really like get out of debt. I can't say that happened all the way until 1975, but I can tell you the plantation ran until 1975, and then it shut down once it was sold. And eventually it did become a nonprofit, which is why I was like, okay, this is something I feel like I can give back to. I did my research because I always do that. But you go through these 14 different sites, and there are so many things, which I will get into. I'll try to post a clip of each and explain that in the rest of the video, but I wanted to explain to you the first part. So actually, what you get also when you get your headphones is a little like lanyard that I guess shows maybe you paid for the tour. But every lanyard has a different person on it that you get like within your group. Mine had Hannah Kelly, and she was a person who was enslaved on the Whitney Plantation. She was 10. And this research was found by Cammie G. Henry Research Center, the Northern State University of Louisiana Federal Writers Project. So her information reads, I was 10 years old when peace was declared. My missus was Lou Downward. I never did do any work, only nursed the children during slavery. My ma worked in the spinning and weaving and making dyes, indigo. She would take sumac berries and make red, black, jack, and make a brown dye. The boys worked in the fields, raided cotton, corn, tatters. We had meat, bread, vegetables. Sometimes on Sunday or a holiday, we would have biscuit. That's exactly what it reads. So my best friend had a different person, and it tells a little fact about the person enslaved, which I think is a really fantastic way to honor them. So I'm sure I will be adding Miss Hannah Kelly to my ancestor list, or in some way honoring her with my spiritual practices. So yeah, I will post some footage moving forward about this experience. I'll try to do it in order of the way that I viewed it and explain different things within there. Of course, if you have any questions, you let me know, but I'll come back at the end and explain the end half of my visit at the Whitney Plantation. All right, y'all, hope you enjoy. Okay, so in the very first part of the museum, you go in. If you've purchased your ticket already, you still have to go in here because this is where the restroom is. This is where the registers are for you to get your headphones, and, give your license, which I talked about a little bit. But what you're going to do is you get to go in, and there is the museum part of the grounds, and this has tons and tons and tons of giant posters. I mean, I'm sure they were at least 6 or 7 feet long with information, kind of like you see in the photos here. This one, one of these shows talks about suppression and resistance and the beginning of slavery all the way to the end of slavery. It kind of gives a timeline of quick little points throughout, while the rest of the posters, of course, are going to go into significant detail with the various, areas that they highlight here. So I would advise going through this part first if you happen to visit, and reading all the information you can absorb. It probably takes, if you read like me, I'm a pretty quick reader, but I like to know the details and write information down, about an hour. Also in this area, there's the restrooms and the gift shop too. So on the other side, though, is the Civil Code of Louisiana, which I thought was really interesting. Obviously, this was the civil code during slavery. I'm almost positive. I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm almost positive that this has changed. Let's hope so, right? Since slavery is over. But some of the things on there, right, were things like it said, a slave is one who is in power. Oh, I'm sorry. A slave is one who is in the power of a master to whom he belongs. The master may sell him, dispose of his person, his industry, his labor. He can do nothing, possess nothing, nor acquire anything but what must belong to his master. It talks about free persons. So it said things like free person and slaves are incapable of contracting marriage together. The celebration of marriages is forbidden and the marriage is void. So if someone was free and a slave, they could not come together. Now, if they were on the farm together and enslaved and got married, which again, they didn't celebrate. They had jumping the broom, in case y'all didn't know, that's where that came from. They didn't celebrate, but they could be married and then one could be free under whatever the circumstances, which was very rare, but it did happen. It talks about, I guess, three kinds of free servants. They talked about, what else? The rules prescribing the police and conduct to be observed with respects to slaves in the state, and the punishment of their crimes and offenses, which again, I can go into further detail a little bit later when I share some other pictures about what they did for these crimes and how they were punished, other than the brutal conditions that we know, like, whipping and lynchings and death. There were some other very specific things they knew about runaways, but this civil code had a ton of information on it. And so I read through each of them and was fascinated. I don't know if that's the right word, but I was just like, this is crazy how we literally, or how society literally was like, yeah, they're not people. They're property, sometimes even less than cows and chickens, but go on your merry way. So yeah, I definitely felt some kind of way reading this code and seeing some of the things in here. Okay, moving forward to the next part. So I do have to say, and I think I talked about it earlier too, how this museum was set up. It was actually done very respectfully, which is why I keep saying, like, if you're going to go visit a plantation, visit ones similar to this, because they actually did honor those that were enslaved. They honored those people who passed on the farm in whatever way that they did. They honored the actual history of the workers, the enslaved, not workers, the enslaved. They honored the history, and they had little snippets of like the owners of the plantation, of course, but it wasn't focused on them. It wasn't focused on how much money they brought in. Yes, of course, it was mentioned in the context of things, but the focus was much different. So, like, they had photos of the Africans who were kidnapped, right? But they had photos of their kings and like where they started, because it literally starts from the very beginning before the slave trade started. So it tells that history all the way until the end when slavery was over, but it still acknowledges things like prison labor, right? So if you didn't know, if you're not from Louisiana, or, I mean, maybe you are from Louisiana and still don't know this, but one of the things that they talk about here was prison labor, and how people, even though the 13th Amendment passed, that prison labor is still a thing, right? That's the way that they were able to keep slavery, although they won't call it that, obviously, slavery alive. So there's literally a prison here in Louisiana that was a plantation. It's called Angola Plantation. Well, the land, I believe it was either sold or donated. I can't 100% remember right now, but it was given in some form, exchanged to the state of Louisiana. And guess what Louisiana did? Literally made it a prison. And you want to know who's in there? A lot of Black and brown people. Yes, there are white people there. I'm not saying that they're not in prison, but the makeup of it is very much how it would have looked if it was an actual plantation. But what's even crazier, they still do things like pick cotton. They have what is known as like the Angola Prison Rodeo, and a lot of people here actually do love to go to it. I've never been, so I can't say for sure what it looks like, but I don't want to subject myself to something like that. That would be me celebrating a freaking slave, or a plantation turned into a prison in my mind. That's what that's supporting. I don't know what the funds go to. I don't know if it goes to the jail. I have no idea. But the point is, I don't like it, so I don't go to it. Kudos to you if you do, though. Maybe one day I will be convinced and go visit and see what it's all about. But yeah, so it does that's what was so interesting about this place, is it talks about those things that we might talk about, or that are rarely acknowledged in museums. So this is a little bit more modern. It was I think updated and handed over and made into a nonprofit in 2019. So that's probably why there's more relevant, updated information. But there were also statues, like you see here, throughout the place. And it was really significant how detailed they were. I actually think the young lady pictured here may have been Hannah Kelly, who I talked about in the beginning. That was on my card. So yeah, I think that was really cool. Okay, so this was actually really interesting too. So of course, like I told y'all, it's a really long poster, but the way that they did this was I was like, okay, what is on the poster? As you go closer, you can see all of these tiny ads, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of runaway slaves, right? And so what they did was with the runaways, they would put ads, and they were advertising for their runaways anywhere from $5 to $40, I guess, depending on their worth, right? And how much they wanted to pay to try to get them back. But these were literal ads, y'all. Each one has a little person, and there were hundreds on this list. And then when you zoom back away from it, they had part of it darkened to represent the same exact thing, the runaways. So it was very powerful to see this. So, y'all, I want to say this was stop 3 or 4 on the 14 item tour, right? Self-guided tour. But I had to sit at this moment and just reflect, because I was thinking this is beautiful, and the way I'm experiencing it is obviously much different than the enslaved and the ancestors that were on this plantation. And then it made me think about when people get married on plantations, which, yes, it's still a thing. Sad and scary and disrespectful, in my opinion, because these are basically hallowed grounds, right? These are where people have died and millions were killed, and families were separated, and it's a sad place. As a Black person, I can't say what others' experiences are because I am Black. But it's, in my mind, if you have a wedding on a plantation, it's disrespectful. This plantation, there's no way they would ever allow weddings to occur on there, because, like I said, it's now a nonprofit. But there are several throughout Louisiana and, of course, other states that do allow this. So I just wanted to share this image with you. It's beautiful, but also thinking about what actually occurred here. So I did not record the inside of the slave master's home, um, enslaved master's home, however you would like to word that. I didn't think it was necessary, although I have to say, we were innovative. And when I say me, we, I mean our ancestors, right? Because they had these giant vases, y'all. Me and my best friend thought they were restrooms, but they actually did have outhouses. Um, Anyways, though, they had these giant vases that were in the ground, and that's why we thought they were restrooms, because it was inside the house. But then we found out from one of the people who were there that it was not a restroom, but it was a way that they stored things that needed to be cold. In the ground is obviously cooler temperatures, so they wrap their stuff, store it inside there if it needed to remain cold for a season or whatever reason, and then they could go in there and pull the stuff out and get the stuff out. But that actually came from Africa. That's how they used to store and keep their things here. So it's amazing how we literally help create all these things, right? But here are some images of the kitchen where the cooking happened for the masters. They actually did not use this kind of setting to cook their own foods. They had outdoor kitchens, so to speak. They had, the outside pots and things that they had to make. But this was a dangerous place to be. Obviously, you see, it's a whole open flame that you're cooking over, big pots. I wish I had gotten closer to the knives because they looked razor sharp, but they had some of the actual old items that had been reserved here. So yeah. Okay. And then we go a little bit further down to the next area. And these were actual homes that have been left on the plantation. There are only 2 or 3 that are still standing. This one happened to be in I say good condition because it was well preserved, and they actually had people living in these until about the 1970s, because some people, even though they were free, they still stayed on the plantations because obviously that's all they knew, right? They had general stores and things that kept them in this cycle of poverty, which imagine how that affects people still now today, to this day, when honestly, when those that enslaved people were able to pass on their wealth to their people, and yet we as Black Americans still struggle a lot of times with finances. It all goes back to slavery, which is quite ironic and crazy to think about. But they stayed in these homes, and the big kettles, I guess you see in the front, is actually where they boiled sugar cane, because remember, this was a sugar cane plantation, an indigo plantation at one point. But they would literally have to, by hand, from kettle to kettle, do what's the word, like scoop it out with these big, I guess, ladles, and get it boiled down to the finest, most refined that it could be. But this was all done by hand, and I was watching a documentary and thinking about it when I saw how dangerous it was to cut the cane, right? Because it's really hard. If you've never seen cane, it's like solid. um but they had to use machetes to whack it down, obviously. But if they didn't have metal like these modern day times do now, they could risk cutting literally into their leg with a big machete, because you have to really hit the root or the area of the cane very, very firmly. And then to have to then go and boil it down like this and do it is quite scary. Not to mention, you also had things like snakes and stuff that obviously this was their native territory, which also reminds me that multiple homes that were on here that were reserved have been destroyed from hurricanes. It's pretty close to swampland and things like that. So a lot of that has gotten flooded or destroyed during the winds and stuff of hurricanes. So just remember that if you go on to visit. Next, we'll go to the inside. Okay, so here you can see the inside of what a enslaved person's plant oh my gosh, almost said plantation, enslaved person's house would have looked like. Obviously not all of them were this, I will even say, luxurious, because this is luxurious by some standards. And I'm sure some of this maybe wasn't there when the transatlantic slave trade initially happened. But these are some of the things you see. There's the beds, there's the hearth that they had in some of the homes. They would get very cold in the winter. As you can see, there's some different cracks there. And so they had to be very, very, what's the word, frugal, or maybe not even frugal. That's not the word I'm looking for. They had to be very innovative with how to keep themselves warm. In one of these cabins, because like I said, it was up and running until like the 1970s or so, they did have an outlet, which I don't think I took a picture of where they had like an electricity plug, because they did eventually have to put electricity into these buildings. So this is kind of what it may have looked like depending on what plantation you're on. Okay, I think this was about stop 7 or 8, something along those lines. May have even been 9. But this is not an actual jail that the plantation would have had, but this is very similar to what it would have looked like. This is obviously like a box car that they created. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, wow, that is crazy. If you know anything about Louisiana weather, it's unpredictable, right? Sometimes it's storms, sometimes it's sunshine and a nice breeze, but most of the time it's going to be very hot and humid. And this was metal, so I can't imagine how that must have felt being in a literal heat box, because it's attracting heat. And you have the ground, because I don't know if they were on grass or on concrete like this, but obviously that's going to heat up. And even though it has windows or the grid, I guess, to allow maybe some air to get in. Obviously, it was not going to be a place anyone wanted to be. And this is probably one of the better ones than most, because from my understanding, a lot of times people could be tossed into their jail, the plantation jail, and may not have even had a breeze like this, or it could have been a box or a hole or anything like that. But I wanted to give you all an idea of how enslaved were kept or captured, which, speaking of, I said earlier that I was going to let y'all know what happened when someone ran away. So there was a system here, at least in Louisiana. I don't know about anywhere else, but I can speak to this particular area, where I believe the first time an enslaved person ran away, they may have been branded possibly with the fleur de lis, which I was like, wow, the meaning behind that. Even if that wasn't its intent, a lot of times things are perverted. We know that the swastika was an African, what's the word? A Adinkra symbol that was perverted. But so these are the kind of things that would happen. You would get branded with a fleur de lis. I believe the second time you ran away, they may have cut a arm or a foot or something. I'm not 100% sure. The third time, then they would cut off the ear. And again, I may have gotten the second and third wrong, but just know they were cutting off body parts. And then the fourth time, obviously, if they saw you had a body part missing, an arm, an ear, and a brand, they knew that you had attempted to run away multiple times. And at that point, it was death. So you may not have ever even gotten tossed into the jail. Okay, so let's pause for a moment, because although the whole experience was heavy, I mean, I didn't feel horrible when I left, like some plantations I visited, right? But I did want to put a trigger warning in this particular area of the video, because the next part definitely gets a bit more graphic with the sculpture and the things I'll be talking about. Like I said, I know the whole thing is sad, but this part was really heavy for me personally, so I thought it made sense to go ahead, add a little trigger warning for y'all. I will put in the description of the video where, if you don't want to see this particular part, you can skip ahead. This not statue, this sculpture was very, very powerful to me. And it was an area that they did request silence, which I thought, again, was a great way to honor them. This area also had gifts and trinkets and things that people had left, whether it was spiritual or they just wanted to connect. It was beautifully done, quite honestly. But let me tell you a little bit more about this, and also the names of the leaders that are kind of in the front row. So this was a honor or a sculpture that represented the 1811 German Coast Uprising, which was a revolt with Black slaves, obviously it was called the territory of Orleans back then, but the New Orleans area, because that's what was known as the German coast. So the uprising occurred on the east bank of the Mississippi River. And this insurgency was the largest in U.S. history, but the rebels actually only killed 2 white men, and I don't even know if they were the plantation owners or not. But that part doesn't matter. It's the fact that I literally never heard about this in history, and even when I did live in Louisiana, and was in school, we didn't learn this. Even when I came back for part of high school, like a small area, when we learned about Louisiana history, I think this wasn't taught. So it was a surprise to me that this was something that was one of the largest revolts in U.S. history, and we didn't know about it. But here it is. So I think after they were confronted by the militia and the executions after trial, it was 95 people overall who were killed, Black people, but between 64 and about 125 or so enslaved men marched from sugarcane plantations towards the city of New Orleans. And then along the way, they collected more and more men. So some people said around 200 to 500. There's no actual record of how many, but it was a 20-mile march, and they burned 5 plantation houses. 3 were completely burned. I think several sugar houses and crops. And of course, they were mostly armed with those hand tools, like I talked about earlier, that they used to handle and get the sugar cane. So over I think the next 2 weeks or so after the militia came in, because yes, the military came in, right? And probably accused them of something like drapetomania, which we know was a thing in psychology. But over about the next 2 weeks, I think the white planters interrogated, tried, and executed, and then decapitated about 44 people escaping slavery who had also been captured. So it was either decapitation, hanging, or a firing squad. And then those whose heads they decapitated were put on pikes and along the river in order to intimidate anyone else who was considering doing this. So if you want to take a little moment of silence here and pause the video, that would be fine. I'm going to move ahead and mention the leaders' names. Like I said, we don't know everyone, but we do have accounts of some people. There was Charles, who was the primary leader, Gilbert, Matherin, Joseph, Amar, Comina or Comana or Quamley, which actually is a close to Kwamana, or a variant of Kwame, like we know in the African American community mostly. There was Cook, Dagobert, Hippolyta, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and then Linder, that sacrificed their lives in order to try and take some of the burden off of our ancestors. So if anyone practices spirituality, connecting with your ancestors, these men were an integral part of our history and should be honored. I often, now that I know this, have added them to my daily libations. You know, they're my enlightened ancestors at this point. Okay, so this next part is also pretty heavy, but what you see here is an area of the plantation and the tour that was dedicated to the enslaved children who died between, I believe it was the 1820s and the 1860s. This area is referenced as the Field of Angels, and their deaths were documented in the sacramental records of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. I think I said that right. But their names are engraved on the granite slabs that you see, along with the WPA. I can't remember exactly what that stood for, but they were slave narrative quotes which described the daily lives of those enslaved children here in the South. Of course, the death rates on the Louisiana cane plantations were relatively high compared to the cotton or the tobacco plantations because it was hard work. But these children were honored at this memorial, and many of them died of diseases, but there were some who died under other tragic circumstances, like being hit by lightning, drowning, burning, those kind of thing. And of course, there was a high prevalence of young mothers and a high mortality rate among the children, but they did choose to honor them with this area. This was not somewhere where you had to be silent, but why would you go through here yelling and talking or anything like that? So anyways, though, I thought this was another area that I thought they did very well. And even reading those different slave narratives was really cool, learning some of the history behind the different nursery rhymes, because there were a couple that were put on there, was really interesting and fascinating to read, to know that these things continued throughout history. Okay, so this particular portion of the tour is a more, I would say, a more positive way to end a tour. There'll be another little section I do, and then about my overall experience. But I thought it was really important to share this part. Again, the Whitney Plantation was, I think, the first place to document and honor the enslaved. I think there are more that have started to slowly come up and create an experience more like this. But this was, or this is an area as a slave memorial, and it was dedicated, or it is dedicated, not was, it's dedicated to, I think, 107,000 people enslaved in Louisiana and that were documented in the Louisiana slave database. Those are the ones that were known. The lady, I think it's Alice. Ali, it's French, but Gwendolyn Midlow Hall was a civil rights and labor attorney. So her and her husband were among the founders of the Provisional Organizing Committee for a Communist Party, which sounds weird, right? But it was it was formed in 1952. Anyways, though, Gwen was teaching at the Elizabeth City State College in North Carolina, I think in about 1965, and she encouraged Black students to organize armed resistance against the KKK and to oppose the U.S. military involvement in Vietnam at the time. So she was also a mentor of many generations of historians of slavery. I mean, highly regarded for her public outreach and award-winning scholarship among historians in Africa, Europe, and the U.S. and the Caribbean, I believe. An author of the slavery and African ethnicities in the Americas. But anyway, my whole point is that she was the person who helped make this happen, along with, of course, some other researchers and people who donated to what she was doing. But it was really amazing to me that she took so much time to help find these records. And what's so even more special is she helped not only find the records of the names, but she also made sure to document like where they came from, as in the country, their countries of origin, what languages they spoke. She literally gave these people a voice when they did not have a voice. It kind of makes me think of Jane Elliott a little bit. I don't think Jane Elliott has documented slave histories, but she's a very outspoken educator for, not for African Americans, but that is very blatant about the African American experience, even though she is white, and calls people out about their behaviors. If you've never seen the, I think it's Blue Eye Brown Eye Experiment, you should go watch it. I'm sure it's probably here on YouTube. But yeah, so this was a monument dedicated to those thousands and thousands of slaves enslaved. They had quotes, they had all of their names that they could do, they had pictures etched into this granite or whatever material that is. And it was, I don't know, it had to be like 16 or 17 of these. And I'm sure if more names come up, they will continue to add names onto these. But this was another kind of place of peace and still and quiet. They had benches throughout the whole thing, but they had a lot of benches here. So if you wanted to sit, if you wanted to do research, try to find some names, the original African names, it was pretty cool to do. And even seeing continued quotes here was really interesting. There were a lot, even when people were released from slavery, that like this quote in particular talked about. So I found it really, really fascinating, and again, done very well. Okay, so although the images you see here aren't necessarily at the end of the tour, I wanted you all to get a idea and kind of end on a hopefully more positive note. Of course, I'm still going to talk about my experience at the end, But I wanted to share this with you because it is part of my reasoning for going to the Whitney Plantation, which there's the entrance sign you see. But I wanted to share with y'all the quote that was in the museum, but by, I think it was Pope John Paul II. Can't remember the year though. So it said, "These men and women and children were the victims of a disgraceful trade in which people who were baptized but did not live their faith took part. How can we forget their enormous suffering inflicted, the violation of the most basic human rights on those people deported from the African continent? How can we forget the human lives destroyed by slavery? In all truth and humility, this sin of man against man, this sin of man against God must be conferred." So although I don't agree necessarily with the wording about deported from the African continent, and maybe then deported meant something different because they were stolen and sold into slavery by other slaves, which I'll acknowledge, but they didn't necessarily know better, right? They didn't know that this was how slavery was going to be in America or the Caribbeans. Anyway, though, so I wanted to share that quote because for me, it was a powerful experience to go and visit and sit with these ancestors, even if they were not direct descendants from my lineage, and to see what they experienced and to know that they are being honored in this place. And I felt like that was really important for me to go back and do. So I think I talk about it Sankofa, which means to go back and find or go back and, and remember. Basically, it's saying you go back and remember the past so that the future looks different, or so that you can acknowledge, what you've experienced in the future. It kind of goes to speak about that, which again, I'll talk about a little bit further later on in the video. But if you all made it this far, thank you for watching this. If you have questions, you can definitely let me know. But I wanted to make sure I shared this experience and this journey with you. That particular statue or sculpture makes me think of the song Break Every Chain. If you know, you know. If you don't, ask somebody in the comments, right? So yeah. All right. I'll see y'all in just a moment to discuss my experiences. Hi, y'all. So I hoped you learned something from the footage that I shared with you in the video earlier. I know I learned a lot. In case you didn't notice, yes, I did change. It's the next day, and the reason I felt the need to do that was because I felt like I really needed to sit with my experience a little bit longer. I immediately did the first portion of the video yesterday when I arrived back home after doing some traveling to the site and back from the site, obviously. So it hadn't really set in with me. I mean, the overall experience was beautiful, but let me tell y'all, this morning I was looking at something in particular. I think it was more so about Native Americans in my social media feed and how they had started to what's the word? I can't even remember the exact location, y'all, honestly, but it was about how this hotel, I don't know if it was located on Native American land. It could have been, and probably was, because they issued a cease and desist letter from a treaty of some sort. And you might know what I'm talking about if you've been looking at social media. But it was a very, very large group. Several different tribes had come together to make this happen. And what initially happened was they told Native Americans they were not going to be allowed to I guess go to their establishment, to the hotel, because they couldn't tell the difference between good natives and bad natives. What? Really? So as I was thinking about that, I literally just had this gut reaction, and I started crying, and I was like, what am I crying for? Why am I like crying? This happens all the time. And then I thought about it and I said, I really think this has to do with my experience yesterday and today, and seeing these Native Americans come together for one, but also knowing it's very unlikely I'll get to have that experience. It wasn't just that they came together. It was that they came together. They had their traditional, attire, their headdresses and all of that and stuff on them. And so I was like, oh, that's like amazing. And then I recognized I don't know where I come from. I mean, yes, I was born in the U.S. Yes, my parents are from Louisiana. Well, my mom's from Louisiana. My dad's from Colorado. But like all of our family's from Louisiana. I know that. I've been able to trace back some, to the people in Louisiana. But any further than that, as far as like, where we originally here, is this where we arrived on ships on the German coast? Is this where my ancestors came from, or were they in South Carolina and then had to migrate down here? I just don't know. And then from that point, I don't know how far back I can go to even figure out exactly what tribe or nation I'm from. I don't know. And it was sad because I would love to experience that authentic community, to be able to say I'm a part of something, to practice those traditions, and I can't. I mean, granted, I can in the sense of being a Black American. There are certain things that we do that I absolutely love, that I participate in. Juneteenth, cookouts. Those are Black culture. But to actually have a tribe, if that makes sense, like to know this is where I belong, this is where I've come from, these are the things that we practice, these are the reasons that we do these things, it would be lovely. But not only that, I also started thinking about how every facet of my life, or my ancestors' lives, or whoever you want to say, has been shaped by slavery. Even as far as the credit, which I talked about earlier in the video, with some of the systems in place, and how, when slavery ended, how they had credit systems, and people had to go to these stores that were on the plantation. So obviously they're run by the people who run the plantations, and in order to get groceries to feed their family, food, pork, chicken, whatever it is, eggs, milk. And so they had these systems in place where they had store credit, but the store credit was paid by whatever their wages were. Even if they made enough money, who's to say they were paid fair? So they already were in debt, and literally indebted. So they weren't even making money. So it was still slavery, right? Even just thinking about how here in Louisiana, Angola prison was a plantation that was, I don't know if it was sold or donated, but either way, it's still a working prison. That was a plantation. No one sees the irony in that, and the odd way that came to be, and how the 13th Amendment fit and flowed perfectly with that, right? Slavery is illegal, except for if someone commits a crime. But the crimes, the people who are making the laws, are the ones who got to decide what a crime was. Someone steals eggs because they're hungry. That's a crime. You got hard labor. Convict leasing. That's what they used to do with their slaves. Hey, you can borrow my person. You can borrow my enslaved person for some months, weeks, because they have this skill, and I'm going to get paid for it. And then they're going to come back here and keep doing whatever it is that they're doing. The systems that were set in place were systems meant to keep us oppressed, and we're still in that place. And I know people say, well, what are you talking about? Like, you have a house, you have a car, you have all these degrees, there's no segregation. That is true, but there are bigger systemic issues. Yes, I acknowledge I have privilege in some areas. That is very true. But it doesn't mean it negates all the other systemic issues that are still there. So, with that said, I will end this on a happy note. When I went back in to turn in my headset and buy a couple of things out of the gift shop, because I really wanted to. They had a fantastic selection from the books, like the 1619 Project. There was a lot of stuff, and I was like, I feel like I'm gonna spend a lot of money in here. They even had bowls and all of this. Well, not all of it, but a lot of the stuff was created by um, people within the continent of Africa. Now, there's specific communities or countries, I should say, and so I can't say like it came directly from here because depending on the item would depend on which country it came from. So, you know, Kenya, I know for sure was one because I saw some items from there. I think I can't think, maybe Ghana, I think was another place that I saw on the back where it came from. But all of the stuff they try to buy and place in that shop is sustainable and has like a fair trade. So I want to make sure I'm supporting those things, right? So without further ado, let me show you what I found. I loved it. I literally had been saying since I've started my spiritual practices and Reiki, I was like, I really want to get more stuff from, I'm going to say my home country because Africa, I feel like is in my blood. I do think it's my home country, even if I don't know exactly what part I hail from. So I was like, I want to start finding more African jewelry to wear to support. And I want to make sure that I'm doing this in an organic way and that it feels good to me. And this felt good to me. So I went ahead and purchased some things. These, for instance, Taka. It's the Taka collection. And so on the back, they have, they're part of the Fair Trade Federation. And these were only $7. But it says the Kisumu. Kenya has long been known for artisans who make products from easily obtainable material, a nice way of saying trash. Taka literally means trash in Kiswahili. So this is cool. I don't think, it doesn't tell me specifically what these were, but they actually kind of look like, what are the things called? You know, like fishing lure to me. I'm not 100% sure, but they're really pretty and authentic. So I was like, okay, that's cool. Plus, I love doing stuff like that. If anyone's ever seen my like Cambodia videos, I also bought, as a matter of fact, the ones that I have in now, I bought these from a local place that was doing like NGO type stuff. And they were recycled spoons. I also have a recycled like fork, and I bought several family members recycled wallets that were made from the tire and the rubber that had traveled through the country that they were like tossing out, so they took it, recycled it, and made it into wallets, which was cool. So there's that. Then I have these, which are another favorite that I like. So these were handcrafted for Swahili imports. It's Kenyan cow bone. And they're actually gray comb earrings. I love these. I thought they were really pretty. But my absolute favorite thing, I'm like, spirit always comes through. This whole process has been integral. And when I found this item, I was like, it was meant for me to be here. Right? So, before I get to that, I also have a habit of collecting elephants. I don't know if that is my spirit animal. I got to do more research on that. But I got 2 different size elephants when I was in, I think these actually were from Cambodia, not Vietnam. But I found this one. It's a little one that I thought was super cool. And it's not ivory, so I know it's not coming from an actual elephant, which I probably wouldn't purchase anything like that. Okay, this is the thing that is so meaningful for me. So let me just tell y'all, I had a conversation with my dad when I was talking about what I wanted to do. And it was me discussing how when I get a ranch, notice I say when I get a ranch because I'm going to have my ranch with my horses and my beautiful land. I said I wanted to call it Sankofa Farms or Sankofa Ranch or some variation of that, but I wanted to make sure I included Sankofa and the Adinkra symbol for that. And so when I started my research for the Birthright Africa Scholars and the program that I am hoping to be a part of, I started finding Sankofa, like the term and the word, and it just kept popping up. And I was like, this is meaningful to me. So what that means is go back and take. So basically it's like learning from your past, learning from mistakes and past, and not even mistakes, but just learning from your past to help you build the future. And I thought that was beautiful. So I'm going through this shop, and y'all, the last thing I found before I went to check out, because I was getting ready to check out, and I was like, okay, you know, I'm ready. Look at this. What's that say? Right? Sure. Hopefully y'all can see that. Sankofa. And I thought, oh my gosh, it was perfect. So to go back and take, and the bracelet has the symbols on it. There's actually another symbol that you may have seen if you've heard the word or seen the word. It looks more like a bird, but this is the second one. But yeah, I found this and I was like, it's perfect. It was meant for me to be at this location. It was meant for me to find this bracelet, and I'm going to wear it with me, or have it with me. I haven't wanted to take it off because I wanted to share it with you all before I put it on. But that's what that whole experience was for me. So yes, it was sad. I didn't necessarily feel angry because of the way that they honored the enslaved at this particular plantation, which sounds weird to say, honestly, but it was. If I was going to recommend someone visit here, I would definitely say this was a great one to go and like look at and get the experience and the feel. It wasn't focused on how much money was brought in from the crops and the owners, which are the what are their names? Y'all, I don't know why I want to say Hyacinth. That's not right. Hydels. The Hydels were the original owners of this plantation. It doesn't focus on them. Like, you have a poster or two that kind of talks about it in the context of the whole the transatlantic slave trade and all of that, but it doesn't focus on them, which is why I was like, okay, this one feels different, even through the website, which I said earlier. So yeah, that was my experience. If you all have any questions, if you've ever visited any plantation, I would love to know what your experience was, what you took away. You could post them in the comments below. I will put the link for the Whitney Plantation because they do take donations and things like that. They are a nonprofit organization that's meant to help, like I said, educate the public on the enslaved rather than the captors. So I think I would, this is something I would actually support, and I will go back to, and if anyone visits me and wants to go, I would be more than willing to take them. So yeah, let me know what your experience were if you visit a plantation, if you'd like to visit a plantation, or if you have any hesitation about visiting a plantation, because I know it is not for some people. Some people don't want to do it, but I feel like this is a way I want to honor my ancestors, and so that is what I am doing to do so, other than pouring my libations and prayers and things like that. This is a way I feel like I give back so that they are remembered, because history is trying to erase us, right? We see that. Not history, I would say, especially in the US, politicians and stuff, which is a whole other topic. They're trying to erase what we're talking about. Critical race theory is important. I won't get on that soapbox, but those are the things, and so I feel like I need to go and do that for them. So thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, let me know. I could always make a different video with those questions, a Q&A type of thing. But yeah. All right, y'all.